Now, the start of the Fed happens. This is interesting times, because back then, gold was at $20.67 an ounce. $20.67 an ounce. What happened is the banking aristocracy knew that they could flood the economy with cash, and that's what they did. And they bubbled up or created the Roaring '20s. So that way then in the 20s, everyone became an investor in the stock market. From the shoe shine boy to a movie star to anyone that's never invested before, all became an investor. Very similar to everyone that bought property, all thought they were property investors 10 years ago, and now they're wondering what's going on with property. When you flood the economy with a bunch of money, you get a big rise in asset prices, and this is what happened in the 20s. And then they called the loans in. What happened back then in the subprime in 2008, basically, they did margin lending on property. You put your deposit in, you leverage up, and you buy your property. They just did the same thing on stocks. It's called margin lending on stocks. So you put your deposit in, you could leverage up, and you'd buy stocks in the share market. Everyone thought they were hot. Stocks were doubling and tripling within 3 and 4 and 5 years, and everyone was booming. Until when? Until they called the loans back in. They contracted the currency supply, they called the loans in, and crashed the market. Stocks, blue chip stocks in 1929, if they were at $100, dropped down to $2. They lost 98%. And then the wealth went and bought up those for pennies on the dollar. What was interesting is America entered the war late. There was a lot of gold that entered into the US. And Roosevelt, in 1933, banned their citizens for owning physical gold. He confiscated it. Now, he didn't steal it. Well, he did steal it, but he stole it this way. If you had gold, physical gold, in just before 1933, in 1933, he turned around and said, "We want your gold, and we're going to make it illegal for you to own it. In fact, we'll put you in jail if we catch you with it. So what we're going to do is when we take your gold, we're going to pay you $20.67 an ounce for it." That's what they did. When they realised that they had most of everyone's gold, in 1934 they passed the Gold Reserve Act. And the Gold Reserve Act is an act of Parliament, or Congress back then, and said that any gold in America on American soil belongs to the US government. They summoned a meeting to all the other countries, coalition countries, and they met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Now, Bretton Woods isn't a place. Bretton Woods is a hotel. It just so happens a hotel resides at the bottom of a mountain called Mount Deception. This gets better. So, at the bottom of the Mount Deception, in a hotel called Bretton Woods, an English socialist was there called John Maynard Keynes. He facilitated the meeting along with the rest of the nation's leaders. And what happened was the US got together and basically said, this is the deal. Boys, look, get rid of your gold back in your country's currency and peg it to the US dollar, because trust us, we're good, and look at our gold. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that our gold is 40% backed to the currency, and we'll make the US dollar the world reserve currency. So trade now in the world is done in US dollars, and trust us, we're good for it, and we won't break the rules. So, sounds good deal. This is what they did. The coalition countries did that. So then, out of that Bretton Woods, the establishment of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank happened, all in 1944. So this is how that came about. So then it gets interesting. Well, they had to keep their gold at 40% backing their currency. You know governments and politicians aren't honest. So, what happened then was there's a thing called the Vietnam War came up. They had to fund that. Another thing called the Great Society. They had to fund that. Another thing called the Great Space Race. They had to put man on the moon. Remember? So, what they did is they started printing more currency than they had gold. And through the 60s, America started losing half their gold reserves because the coalition countries didn't believe that they had enough gold backing it, so there was a lot of gold flowing out of them. In fact, the French President Charles de Gaulle at the time did not trust. He was sound in economic principle. He did not trust what the US was doing. So, because every other country is holding US dollars right there, they were redeemable in gold. So what he did is he put all his currency on the ship, sailed it straight to US shores, and he took 3/4 of Americans' gold reserves like that. And without the approval of Congress, or without the approval of the people, Richard Nixon severed the link of gold backing the US dollar in 1971, August 15. That is when the rules of money changed. That meant this: never, ever on the history of the planet has now every single country's currency not backed by anything. We are on a complete fiat global currency right now, and it's a race to the base. That's when the rules of money changed. And you're going to see what happens, because guess what they can do? They can expand the monetary supply now without any reserve limits. The biggest economic boom times are the ones that we've lived in. It's funny, owning gold and silver skipped 2 generations in Australia or the world, because my generation and my father's generation have not seen tough times. And one thing that led to that is the expansion of the US dollar and the currency supply, and that's what boosts asset prices. One thing I'll guarantee you is that the bigger the bubble that's created, every bubble pops.